Everybody. Welcome to everybody in Bishopville, everybody in Pacala, and everybody watching online. To history, there was a man known as Bill W. Bill W. was an alcoholic, and he was a profound alcoholic, meaning he could not get through the day without drinking. And drinking had so destroyed his life, he had been hospitalized one more time to dry out, and he was told by his doctor that if he didn't quit drinking, he would die. And that's a pretty sobering message, but Bill had heard this message before and it hadn't changed him. And he asked the doctor, he said, well, what can I do? What can I do? I've tried everything. And the doctor said, in cases like yours, I've only seen one thing work, and that is the spiritual approach. And he told Bill about a group called the Oxford Group. It was a group of Christians that met together, and they prayed and they studied the Bible, but most important, they were vulnerable with each other. And so they told each other the truth about the progress in their lives. This is the value of a group. And in desperation, Bill W. went to the Oxford Group for the very first time, and he heard God talked about in a way he'd never heard before, how that God had the power to restore a person to sanity, but only if that person admitted that they were absolutely powerless over the alcohol that was destroying their lives. And Bill, in his desperation, surrendered to God. He was honest with the Oxford Group members, and he became sober for the very first time in his life. And after 11 months of sobriety, he found himself on a sales trip to Akron, Ohio, that hotbed of excitement. And while he was in Akron, it was the day before Mother's Day, and he was feeling melancholy because, you see, Bill's mother had abandoned him on Mother's Day 30 years before. That's a painful, traumatic memory. And Bill walked down into the hotel lobby, and there was the bar with all of the lights and all of the excited babble and the smell of alcohol. And a thought came to Bill that he had not had for months. I'm going to get drunk today to deal with the pain, that my mom abandoned me. And Bill knew that if he did that, he would die. And then another thought came to him that he'd never had before. I need to find another alcoholic. And at the other end of the hotel lobby, there were these things called phone booths. Anyone under 30 doesn't know what they are. But back then there were phone booths, and he went to a phone booth and there was a directory of churches, and he began to call through the churches, and he said, my name is Bill and I'm an alcoholic and I need to find another alcoholic. And most of the churches said, what's an alcoholic? They didn't want to admit that any of their members could be alcoholics. Finally, on the 10th church, the lady who answered the phone said, well, there's a friend of mine whose husband is in the hospital right now, and he's not an alcoholic, he's a drunk. You could probably talk to him. What hospital? She told Bill. Bill went to the hospital, found the man. The man's name was Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob was a successful physician, except when he drank, and he drank a lot. He had drank away his practice. He drank away his family. He drank away his money. He was in debt up to his eyeballs. And the doctor had just been in and told Dr. Bob the same thing that another doctor had told Bill a few months earlier. If you don't stop drinking, you're going to die. And Bill walked into Dr. Bob's room and said, hi, Bob, my name is Bill and I'm an alcoholic. And Dr. Bob braced himself for another round of lectures, but that's not what Bill did. Bill instead sat down and said to Dr. Bob, this is my story. And he began to talk about his first drink and how alcohol had captured him and how he had been possessed by alcohol. But then he made a surrender to God, admitting that he was powerless, and he asked God to forgive him. And Dr. Bob had never heard anybody talk like this before. And it turned out that he himself had been to an Oxford group, but he had never taken that step of surrendering to God. And over the course of a few weeks, and yes, Dr. Bob had a few drinks in those few weeks, he finally came to the point where he could surrender his life to God. And he said, God, I can't, but you can. so I'm giving my life to you. That was June 9th. And June 10th, Dr. Bob went to every one of his creditors and said, I'm going to pay you back, I don't know how. He went to his friends where relationships were broken and he said, I don't know how, but somehow I'm going to be a better friend to you. He went back to his practice and he said, let's open up and I'm going to be the best doctor I can be. And the hardest one of all, of course, is he went back to his family and he said, please forgive me. I have hurt you. I have done wrong. But this time, I've surrendered to God. And Dr. Bob would write years later something very telling. He said, the spiritual approach to alcoholism was useless as any other if you kept it to yourself. And so on June 10th, Dr. Bob was the first person who really became part of Alcoholics Anonymous. Interesting, Alcoholics Anonymous does not date its founding to Bill W.'s sobriety. They date it to the day when Dr. Bob finally surrendered because Bill had told his story to Dr. Bob. And the truth that Dr. Bob discovered, it's an old truth, you know it. But it's a truth that we keep forgetting over and over. And the truth articulated by Jesus is simply, as Matthew 16:25 says, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. In other words, you want to keep something, turn it loose. Is something important to you? Give it away. It's the only way you keep it. And that leads us to the last step in this series we call Steps to Joy. I know some of you have thought this series would never end, and it's not over yet. We're going to have one more sermon next week. And the last step, very simply, is we share our experience with others. If you want to experience true joy in your life, you will share your experience with other people. Now, there's an amazing story in the Bible. You probably are familiar with it. And it is about what happens to a man who's restored to sanity by Jesus, and he is told to share his story. So I'm going to summarize most of this story. It's found in Mark chapter 5, starting in verse 1. If you grew up in church, you probably heard this story. So Jesus is with his disciples on a boat, and they go to the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, and that is significant. Because on the southern shore, the western shore, and the northern shore, there are towns that have been settled by Jews. But on the eastern shore, it was settled by Greeks. Now remember, Jews look down on Greeks. They think that they are dogs. That's what they call them. And this is a region known as the Decapolis because there are 10 Greek-speaking cities. They had Greek laws, Greek customs, Greek gods. Why is Jesus going there of all places? Because he's there to plant his flag and say that his movement is not just Judaism 2.0, that his movement is about something more than that. It is to include all people, even the people that the Jews refer to as the dogs. And so Jesus lands on this shore because he knows there is demonic activity, evil activity, and he doesn't have to wait long until that activity finds him. As they come ashore, they've landed in a region where there are tombs, caves hollowed out in the mountainside. And there is a man living there among the tombs. And we are told that he is possessed by many demons. And when Jesus comes up into that area, the man sees Jesus and he runs toward him. And Jesus is not afraid. And this is an important reminder for those of us who call ourselves believers. Never be afraid of evil, because greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. And so when Jesus sees this evil man possessed running toward him, he doesn't flinch. He doesn't panic. He doesn't run away. He just stands there. And listen to what the demon-possessed man says. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High? Swear to God that you won't torture me." That's pretty interesting. We're told by Mark that this man had been possessed by so much evil that he was out of control. People had come with chains to try to chain him down And he would break those chains because evil gives power, and that's why some people like it. And that he had cut himself with rocks and stones, probably as a way to make himself feel something other than evil. Because when you're possessed by evil, even pain can feel good. And he tore his clothes. And he shouted, he cried out. And that's why people didn't want to go to the tombs, because they'd run into this man. And Jesus apparently had told the demons to come out of the man. But the man instead cries out, listen, both from mercy and from fear. Isn't that interesting? See, a lot of us think of Jesus as our friend, and he is our friend, don't misunderstand. But Jesus is also the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and he has the power to drive evil out, and it scares demons to death. So this demon says, what do you want to do with me? That's fear. Don't torture me. He sounds like a whiner, doesn't he? These demons. Don't torture me, Jesus. And so Jesus says, what's your name? And he says, Legion, because we're many. And then the demons or the man, we're not sure who's speaking. Because when evil gets in charge of your life, it destroys the boundary lines. You're not sure if it's the addiction or the evil or yourself. And so the voice comes out and says, don't kill us, don't destroy us, don't send us out of here. Instead, let us go into this herd of pigs. Now, you may not know this. Pigs are not herd animals. And I know this because I've encountered them. The wild boar that live out on our ranch that we're trying to kill because they tear everything up. You run up on a whole nest of them and they'll run every direction you can imagine. Now, cows don't do that. Cows stick together. Sometimes I feel like saying to some of you, are you pigs or cows? But that's another sermon for another day. And so Jesus says, okay, you can go into the pigs. And you would expect when the demons hit this herd of 2,000 pigs that they would all scatter, but they don't. Instead, they band together. And there is such division that comes up in the souls of pigs. Who knew that pigs had souls? They rush over a cliff and they kill themselves. And the pig tenders rush into town and say to all the townspeople, the pigs just ran over a cliff and killed themselves because some man was speaking to the crazy man in the tombs. And all of the town comes out and they found the crazy man, the demon-possessed man, in his right mind, sitting there at the feet of Jesus. And you would think this would be the cause for a great celebration, right? You would think, say, oh my gosh, look at what has happened to this man. This is great. Let's celebrate. But that's not what happened. The people of the town begged Jesus to go away, and we're not told why, but we can speculate. I wonder if they wanted Jesus to go away because, do you know how much 2,000 pigs are worth? That's about $800,000. Having Jesus around will cost you something. Let me ask you, how many of you would be willing to give up $800,000 so that one man could be put in his right mind? Interesting question. Jesus does not force his presence upon them. And this is where we pick up the story in verse 18. When he, that is Jesus, got in the boat, the one possessed called to him to be with him. And he, Jesus, would not allow him. And that seems strange, doesn't it? I mean, isn't the whole point for Jesus to get people to follow him? I mean, after all, he called Andrew and Peter and James and John, and he called Matthew from the tax booth, and he said, come follow me, and they left. And he even talked to people about count the cost before you follow me. But not here. He doesn't allow him to get in the boat. The man was probably a Gentile, but I don't think that's why Jesus didn't allow him to get in the boat. But we can sure understand why he'd want to get in the boat with Jesus. He wants to know more. How did you do this, Jesus? Teach me. I want to know everything I can know about you because you have restored me to sanity. You have changed my life. But Jesus has another plan for this man's life. Look at the next part of verse 19. But Jesus said to him, go to your house, to your people, and carry back word to them how much the Lord has done to you and how he has shown mercy to you. See, Jesus isn't being cruel. He's being very wise. He knows this man does not need more teaching. This man needs to tell his story over and over and over and over and over and over. Why? Tell your story to cement your spiritual transformation. This is the big idea for the day. If you don't get anything else out of this, get this down. Tell your story to cement your spiritual transformation. Now let me kind of dig into that. We've talked before, this is just basic neurology. Your brain has neural pathways. That's why you didn't have to think about brushing your teeth this morning. All you had to do was put toothpaste on the brush and go like that, right? Now, believe it or not, my 4-year-old grandson has no neural pathway for this yet. He doesn't. We have to put the toothpaste on the brush. We have to put it in his mouth and brush back and forth. And he says, Papa, you're brushing too hard. And I said, that's because your teeth are so dirty. He just doesn't have a pathway. He will, in time, I hope. Think about this man's neural pathways. It's all evil. That's all he's known. All he's known is being out of control. All he's known is being possessed. A long time ago, he sinned, and he invited sin to take control of his life, and then he invited a demon to take control of his life, and the demon made room for others. And so all his neural pathways are flawed. That's what we mean when we talk about original sin. Your pathways and my pathways are flawed. We may not be possessed by demons, but let's face it, we've got some evil neural pathways. So how do you rearrange your brain? Some of you think you can rearrange your brain if you just take a little bit more of a drink, take a little bit more of a drug. Some of you think you can rearrange the neural pathways in your brain by shaking your head real hard. Doesn't work that way. You've got to have new behaviors. And Jesus knows the way to create a new neural pathway in this man's brain, in his head, is to get him to tell his story over and over and over. What would happen if you tell your story over and over? You don't have to tell your whole story. All you have to do is tell parts of it. Man, this week on our staff came up to me and said, I just had an amazing experience, Sonny. There was this guy who comes to our church who's a little needy, and he came up to me and he said he needed prayer, and I prayed with him, and there was something that happened in that prayer, and I just felt God. And when we finished, he hugged me, and he said, oh, you don't know how much that means to me. And he walked away, and I said, I got so much more out of that prayer than he got. Or like, I thanked one of our vacation Bible school teachers who worked with the 3-year-olds, and she said, oh, don't thank me. It is a joy to serve these children. And I thought, bless your heart. Or maybe it's like how it happens with our deacons, and it's happened to every one of them in the 20-some-odd years we've been doing this. Our deacons visit in the hospital, and when they go at first, they're nervous. They're new. They keep asking me, what do I say? And I said, don't say anything. Just say, hey, I'm so-and-so. I'm from Alice Drive, and how are you? And then listen, and then ask them if they want prayer. You pray with them, and then they're going to appreciate it. And they come back every time, and they say, I get so much more out of visiting the sick than I give. Does this make sense? If you really want to hold on to something, you got to give it away. That's what Jesus said. If you really want to carve those new neural pathways in your brain, you have got to tell your story. You've got to share your gifts. So what's your story? You may remember that we use this tool, this device, this simple diagram, to help us think about our story, that God made the world a perfect place, sin entered the world, and the world became broken. We have all kinds of ways of dealing with our brokenness. Alcoholism, we have workaholism, we use drugs, we zone out to social media. But the brokenness can be healed if we believe in Jesus and if we follow him, because Jesus entered the world to restore the world to God's perfect design. And when we invite Jesus into our life, God's perfect design begins to be rebuilt into us. Now, I want you to think about this as it applies to this demon-possessed man. What was it like for him? Well, he invited evil into his life, and it broke him. It broke him thoroughly. But when Jesus came into his life, it changed him. And that man was restored to God's original purpose for his life. Now, what's your story? I don't know your story. I know mine. I've never been possessed by a demon. Some people think I have, but no, I've never been possessed by a demon. I came to faith in Christ at a very young age. But I'll tell you this, ever since I started following Jesus, evil has tried to get at me. It has to you too, right? I mean, evil has tried to get me to spend money I don't have. Evil has tried to persuade me that something will make me feel better than God. Evil has tried to persuade me that it's more important to be in control than to be connected. Any of this ringing true for y'all, or is it just me? I'd appreciate it if a few more heads would nod. My story's not real dramatic, but here's what I know. In all the years I've been following Jesus, I've been fighting that evil. Sometimes I do better than others, but I'm slowly being restored to who God made me to be. You know, there's an old song that kind of summarizes, I think, the experience of the demon-possessed man and really the experience of most of all of us. And it's a secular song. It was written by Johnny Nash, not Johnny Cash. And you know the song, don't you? I can see clearly now the rain has gone. I feel like they should have a backup band. Don't you remember it? This is, I can see, the rain is gone. I can see all obstacles in my way. Gone are the dark clouds that had me blind. It's going to be a bright, bright, sunshiny day. You know this song? It's a good song. You don't know that song? The Lord needs to speak to you today. That's what happens when Jesus comes. He restores us to sanity. We can see clearly now. That's what's happening now for this demon-possessed man. And that's what happens for every one of us who give our lives to Jesus. And now here's the hard truth. The reason you're not taking steps to joy is because you're not telling your story. The reason why some of you are held back is you're not telling your story. You're not sharing what God has done for you. So you're not making progress. You're not making new neural pathways. And this man, he did what Jesus told him to do. He carved those new pathways. Look at verse 20. And he, the demon-possessed man, went and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. I want you to imagine this scene. Just imagine. This demon-possessed man goes back to his house. First place he goes. And he opens that curtain that would have separated his house from the street. And he goes through that barn area to the back area where the people would live. And he said, honey, I'm home. And what do you think his wife did? Do you think she rejoiced? No, she grabbed the broom. You're not going to hit me again. And the kids went behind their mama. And he had to come in and say, wait, I've changed. I met a man named Jesus. And he threw the demons out of me. And I have been restored to sanity. And I am so sorry for what I did to you. It was wrong and it was horrible. Please forgive me. And from now on, I'm going to be the best dad and best husband I can possibly be. I won't be perfect, but I'm going to do my best. How long do you think it took her to put down the broom? I'm betting 30 minutes. It took her a while. But he kept telling that story over and over and over and over and over. And finally she realized it had to be true. He was not talking like a crazy man anymore. And the kids slowly started to come out from behind their mama and look at him. And maybe one of them, the youngest, ran to him, embraced his knees, and said, Daddy. Because that's what Jesus can do. He can change a demon-possessed man back into a daddy. And then imagine the next day he goes to the marketplace. He's just going out to buy a few fruits and vegetables because he's not one anymore. And so he's going into the market and somebody stops and pulls him by the arm and says, hey, wait a minute, aren't you that crazy guy? And he says, yeah, I used to be. But then I met Jesus. Then he goes about another 2 steps and somebody else grabs him and says, what are you doing back? What are you doing? You get out of here. He says, no, I've changed. I met a man named Jesus. He changed my life. And he goes about 3 more steps. Another woman looks at him and says, oh no. And he says, no, it's okay. Jesus changed my life. Let me tell you, see, I was living in the tombs and there was these pigs and Jesus and the pigs killed themselves and I came to my right mind. And he said, what? And he told that story over and over and over again. It must have taken weeks just to tell that story in his hometown. And then one day he says to his wife, I got to take a trip. She says, why? And he said, other people need to hear my story. And she said, are you sure? He said, yeah, I know. Don't worry, I'll come back. And he goes to the next town in the Decapolis. He stands up on a rock in the marketplace and he says, everybody listen to me. I've got a story to tell you. I used to be an out-of-control, demon-possessed person, but I met a man named Jesus, and pigs died, and my life was changed. And everybody comes and listens to him. And he tells that story over and over. Do you hear what he's doing? He's carving these new neural pathways. He is telling that story. He's cementing the spiritual transformation that has come into his life because of Jesus. So what's holding you back? And some of you are thinking, well, I don't have a story that's great, that is that great. I get it. Mine's not that great either. You know, I grew up in church. I was accepted Christ when I was 8. I was baptized. I became a preacher, for heaven's sake. I've never run naked around the tombs. Aren't you glad? But somebody needs to hear my story. And some of you are saying, well, I'm not put together enough as a Christian. Hey, none of us are put together. That's why the sign's out there. This is a place of grace. And here's what I have learned. When you are vulnerable, you help other people get real. When you tell the truth about your life. I think that's why being in a group is so important. When you get real and you can actually say to people, look, I'm struggling. Yeah, we're not doing too good right now. Yeah, we're really struggling with this child. Maybe you're just afraid. I get that. So maybe you need to ask Jesus for courage. But let me tell you what will happen if you give your story away. First of all, you will be less self-absorbed. And there's not a person in this room that couldn't stand to be a little less self-absorbed. You will focus on other people, not yourself. You will discover the joy of living out your purpose, because part of God's purpose for you is for you to tell your story. And you don't necessarily have to tell it all, but you're going to encounter somebody this week and you're going to have an opportunity just to speak one word about your story. Hey, I thought my life was over and then Jesus lifted me up and gave me hope. How many people are you going to meet this week that need to hear that? And you'll know the dignity and the thrill of being used by God. Because it's a thrill to be used by God. So after the last service, one of the older men in our church comes to church on a walker. He pulled me aside at the door and he said, I know what you meant when you talked about the thrill. He said, 3 weeks ago, my only great-grandchild came to church with me. And she heard the message and she started asking questions and she wanted to know about what it really meant to follow Jesus. And I opened my Bible and I walked her through that. And he said it was such a thrill. But then he said, you know, I knew that she had questions as a girl that I couldn't answer because I've never been a girl. I get that. And there was a group of ladies who were just standing there. And I motioned them over and they began to talk to her. And they didn't talk down to her. They just talked to her. And I know the ladies he's talking about, and they're all over 65. And don't ever believe that a teenager won't listen to somebody who's older. They will when the moment's right. And they talked to her about following Jesus. And she accepted Jesus, and she was baptized the next Thursday when she went back home. He said, that's a thrill. I'll see her in heaven. That's better than anything you can experience at Disney World. Have you ever experienced that thrill? Well, maybe it's time for you to tell your story so your life can keep changing, so you can step into joy. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, you are so good to us because you restore us to sanity. And God, you help us with a whole new way of thinking, feeling. I pray right now for any who are struggling, who don't know Jesus, that today they would surrender to him and that they would ask for forgiveness and that they would be transformed. But Father, here's what I know. I know that for many of us, we keep missing chances to tell our story because we're afraid. Deliver us from that fear. Help us to tell the story so that we can change and cement the transformation. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.